felt it this week, maybe yesterday, maybe an hour ago. Someone got something you wanted, a promotion, a compliment meant for you, a look across the room that landed on the wrong person, and something moved inside your chest, something hot and tight and completely irrational. You told yourself to let it go. You couldn't. That feeling has a name. But long before it had a name, before it had a word in any language on Earth, a human being felt it for the very first time. And that moment changed our species forever. Here's what most people get wrong about jealousy. They think it's a flaw, a weakness, something evolution is slowly breeding out of us. But the science says the exact opposite. Jealousy is not a bug in your emotional software. It is one of the oldest and most sophisticated programs your brain has ever run. It is older than language, older than farming, older than the wheel. Scientists now believe the architecture of jealousy was being built into the human brain somewhere between 3 and 4 million years ago. Not in a therapist's office, not in a medieval court, on a dusty African plain inside a skull that looked nothing like yours in a mind that had no words for what it was experiencing. Just the feeling. Raw, total, and completely overwhelming. And here is the part that should stop you cold. That first human who felt it, that ancestor standing on cracked red earth, hard hammering, watching something they could not afford to lose. They had no framework for what was happening to them. No one to talk to about it. No language to even name it. Just a sensation that felt like the ground was disappearing. Researchers who study the evolution of emotion describe jealousy as a social alarm system. Its job was never to make you feel bad. Its job was to make you act, to protect something you needed to survive. Because in the world your ancestors lived in, losing a mate, losing your position in a group, losing access to food or protection, that wasn't just painful. It was a death sentence. The jealousy you feel today is a direct signal from that world. It doesn't know you have a phone. It doesn't know you have a salary. It only knows one thing. Something important is slipping away. Do something, right now. But to understand how this all started, you have to go back to a world that no longer exists. And what you find there is stranger than anything you were told. Scientists cannot point to a single skull and say, this is the one. This is the individual who felt it first. But they can do something more interesting than that. They can reconstruct the exact conditions that made it inevitable. And when you look at those conditions, you realize the first flash of jealousy wasn't random. It was the only possible outcome of a brain that had grown just complex enough to understand what it stood to lose. Here is what the fossil record tells us. Around 2 million years ago, something extraordinary happened inside the human skull. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for social awareness, for reading other people, for understanding that other minds exist and have intentions, began expanding at a rate unlike anything seen before in primate evolution. This wasn't gradual. By evolutionary standards, it was explosive. And with that expansion came something no animal before us had ever fully possessed: the ability to model the future. To look at a situation unfolding in front of you and think, if this continues, I lose something. That is the cognitive engine of jealousy. Not emotion first, prediction first. Your brain runs a simulation. It sees a threat to something it values. It calculates the probability of loss. And then the emotion fires like an alarm. Anthropologist Helen Fisher spent decades studying the brain chemistry of romantic attachment and the states that destabilize it. Her research points to a specific network: the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the ventral tegmental area. These are ancient regions. Regions your ancestors shared with animals that lived 50 million years before them. But in humans, they began receiving input from that rapidly expanding prefrontal cortex. And that wiring changed everything. Because now the alarm wasn't just firing in response to something happening right now. It was firing in response to something that might happen. Something you imagined. Something you projected. That is uniquely human. A dog feels something when another dog approaches its food bowl. But it doesn't lie awake at night imagining it. You do. Neuroscientists at UCLA ran brain imaging studies on people experiencing jealousy and found something that surprised almost everyone. The regions that lit up most intensely were not the ones associated with anger. They were the ones associated with physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that activates when you break a bone. Your brain does not distinguish between social loss and bodily harm. To your nervous system, they are the same category of event. The first human who felt jealousy wasn't being dramatic. They were in genuine pain. A new kind of pain the world had never produced before, and it was about to reshape everything. Pain that intense does not stay inside one person. It spreads, it changes behavior, it forces invention. And what jealousy forced your ancestors to invent was something that altered the entire trajectory of human civilization. Language, ritual, pair bonding, social hierarchy. Nearly every structure that separates human society from every other animal society on Earth has jealousy's fingerprints on it. Start with pair bonding. For most of primate evolution, mating was fluid, flexible. There were no couples, no partnerships, no expectation of exclusivity. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, still operate this way. But somewhere in the window between 2 and 3 million years ago, something shifted in early human groups. Anthropologists call it the transition to monogamy, and they have argued for decades about what caused it. The leading theory today is not romantic. It is neurological. As the prefrontal cortex expanded and early humans became capable of tracking relationships across time, of remembering who was with whom and what that meant for their own position in the group, the emotional cost of perceived betrayal became unbearable. Jealousy became so destabilizing to group cohesion that pair bonding emerged partly as a solution, a social contract, not written down, not spoken, just enforced. by the most powerful alarm system the human brain had ever developed. And then language arrived to give it teeth. Researchers studying the evolution of language argue that gossip, the tracking and broadcasting of social information, was one of the primary drivers of early human speech. Robin Dunbar at Oxford proposed that language evolved not to describe the physical world, but to manage social relationships, to say who did what to whom, to warn, to accuse, to negotiate. Jealousy gave early humans something urgent enough to talk about. It created the social stakes high enough to make complex communication worth developing. Every word you have ever spoken about a relationship, about loyalty, about betrayal, traces a line back to that original alarm firing in an ancient skull on an African plain. But jealousy didn't just build language, it built religion. Anthropologists studying early burial sites and ritual artifacts across Europe and Africa have found consistent evidence of symbolic behavior emerging in the same period that pair bonding intensified. Rituals around death, around fertility, around belonging. Many researchers now believe that the earliest gods were not gods of nature or gods of war. They were gods of social order, supernatural enforcers of the pair bond, of loyalty, of the group boundary. Your ancestors didn't just feel jealousy, they built entire belief systems to manage it. Every culture that has ever existed on Earth has myths, laws, and rituals specifically designed to contain it. That is not a coincidence. That is a species trying to survive an emotion powerful enough to tear it apart. So here you are, 3 million years later, sitting with a feeling your ancestors carved into stone, prayed to gods about, built entire languages to describe, and it still brings you to your knees. Not because you are weak, because you are running hardware designed for a world that no longer exists. And understanding that changes everything. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a rival stealing your mate on a savannah and someone liking your partner's photo at midnight. The threat detection system does not grade on a curve. It does not weigh proportionality. It fires the same alarm for both. Full intensity, every time. This is why jealousy feels so catastrophically out of scale with what actually happened. Because the system measuring the threat was calibrated in a world where that threat meant death. Where losing your position in a group meant starvation. Where losing a partner meant losing the only person who helped you keep your children alive through winter. Your nervous system is not overreacting. It is reacting exactly as designed. The problem is, the design is ancient and the world is new. Psychologists studying jealousy in modern relationships have found something that cuts straight to the heart of this. The people who suffer most from jealousy are not the ones who feel it most intensely. They are the ones who understand it least, who treat it as a verdict instead of a signal, who let the alarm become the story instead of asking what the alarm is actually trying to protect. Because buried inside every episode of jealousy is a piece of information your brain considers critical, something you value, something you fear losing, something that matters to you enough to hurt. That information is real, even when the threat is not. Every therapist, every researcher, every person who has ever come out the other side of a jealousy that nearly destroyed them says the same thing in different words. The feeling is not the enemy, the unconsciousness is. The moment you can look at that tightness in your chest and ask, what am I actually afraid of losing here? The ancient alarm system stops running your life and starts informing it. That is the distance between an emotion 3 million years old, destroying your relationship, and building something stronger than you had before. Tonight, you will feel something. Maybe jealousy, maybe something adjacent to it. That familiar heat behind the sternum, that pull toward a story about what it means. And when you do, remember this. The first human who felt what you are feeling had no words for it, no framework, no one to explain it. They just stood there on cracked red earth with a chest full of fire, and no idea that what they were experiencing would one day wire together entire civilizations. You have something they never had. You know what it is. That is not a small thing. That is everything.